Robby, what's on your radar?
All eyes have turned toward the Virginia governor's race, which will be decided later today, barring hiccups at the polls, in favor of Democrats and former Governor Terry McAuliffe or Republican challenger Glenn Youngkin. Now, as we've discussed previously on this show, McAuliffe initially enjoyed a healthy lead owing to Virginia's status as a blue state. But for whatever reason, Joe Biden's sagging poll numbers or something else, the race is now quite close. According to the most recent polling from Roanoke College, Youngkin and McAuliffe are in a statistical tie. A Fox News poll showed Youngkin leading among likely voters, while a Washington Post poll gave McAuliffe just a very slight lead. Now, for Democrats, this contest is about one thing, or rather one man, Donald Trump. McAuliffe frequently sounds as if he is running against the former president rather than against Youngkin. And it's easy to understand why he would try to run against Trump. While Trump is extremely popular among the Republican base, he's toxic for independents and moderate Democrats. Non-MAGA Virginians want nothing to do with Trump, so it makes sense for McAuliffe to associate the two at every turn. Here's McAuliffe just yesterday referring to Youngkin as Glenn Trumpkin.
He doesn't believe the nurse working in a cancer ward should be required to be vaccinated. I happen to believe it. He doesn't believe, he says, day one, all masks come off and all vaccine requirements of teachers goes away. That will not happen with Governor Terry McAuliffe. Let me tell you this. We got to protect our students. Today, 1,142 of our children have been hospitalized with COVID. We just lost two 11-year-olds. Do you really want parents here sending your child to first grade where the teacher's not vaccinated, they're not wearing masks? No! Well, that's what you get.
And then he says with Glenn Trumpkin. The Youngkin campaign, on the other hand, has criticized McAuliffe for being obsessed with Trump. Here's a Youngkin campaign ad.
Terry McAuliffe wants to make this about a man who's not on the ballot in Virginia.
Terry McAuliffe's campaign in Virginia is all about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Trump, Donald Trump, Trump is Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, 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 Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Trump, Donald Trump, 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 Donald Trump, Trump. Donald Trump, 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 Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Trump, Donald Trump, 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 Donald Trump. He keeps invoking Trump. Donald Trump, Donald Trump, 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 Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Trump.
I'll spare you from having to watch the second half of that ad. Rest assured, it's very much the same. In one sense, the Republican Party absolutely deserves to be saddled with Trump's baggage. Very few members of the GOP dared to stand up to Trump's absurd behavior, including when he disputed the outcome of the 2020 election. Those precious few who did oppose Trump from within his own party were quickly marginalized. Republican leaders had every opportunity to break with Trump, and we know that privately they can't stand the man. But they kept on nodding and smiling because it was the easier thing to do. Trump is their guy, and they have to own that. But Democrats have to own their unsavory connections as well. Now, there might not be a single figure as obnoxious and unlikable as Trump within the Democratic coalition. But the people supporting McAuliffe's candidacy are part of a faction that includes some truly suspicious and harmful ideas that affect what kids are learning in public schools. Now, we've heard a great deal about critical race theory, the salience of which has helped make education one of the most important issues in this race. Here's UVA political scientist Larry Sabato discussing it.
So how did education become the number one issue, Larry?
Because one of the candidates decided it was his ticket to the governor's mansion, and he may well be right. The operative word is not critical, and it's not theory. It's race. What a shock, huh? Race. That is what matters, and that's why it sticks. There's a lot of, we can call it white backlash, white resistance, whatever you want to call it. It has to do with race. And so we live in a post-factual era anyway, Chris. This is a post-factual era. It doesn't matter that it isn't taught in Virginia schools. It's this generalized attitude that whites are being put upon, and we've got to do something about it, we being white voters.
Now, I've often liked Larry's commentary, but that was a vicious smear. Many parents, and many of the parents being labeled quote-unquote domestic terrorists for protesting at school meetings, for instance, they merely object to the idea, an idea inspired by critical race theory and preached by some of its adherents, that white children should be made to feel guilty for the past sins of white people, or that minority children, by virtue of their skin color or ancestral culture, are incapable of competing academically with their peers. Here's Condoleezza Rice discussing the problem during a recent appearance on The View.
One of the worries that I have about the way that we're talking about race is that it either seems so big that somehow white people now have to feel guilty for everything that happened in the past. I don't think that's very productive. Or black people that feel disempowered by race. I would like black kids to be completely empowered, to know that they are beautiful in their blackness. But in order to do that, I don't have to make white kids feel bad for being white.
And we're not talking about theoreticals. Here's a bit more from that same segment.
In Cupertino, California, in an elementary school, third graders are instructed to rank themselves based on their power and their privilege. California's Department of Education is proposing to eliminate opportunities for accelerated math in the name of equity. In Greenwich, a white bias survey is handed out to seventh grade English class. A New York private school is separating by race, gender, and ethnicity. White identifying group met with a white consultant who displayed a slide that named supposed characteristics of white supremacy. An equity statement from the school district of Palm Beach County outlined the initiative dismantling structures rooted in white advantage. It's happening across the country.
That's an agenda for schools that is supported by a small number of progressive social justice activists within the Democratic Party. It enjoys the full support of the relevant authorities, many school boards, teachers' unions, etc. If McAuliffe opposes it, he's afraid to say so. Indeed, his top education policy surrogate is Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. You want to know what Weingarten thinks about the right of parents to have some input over what's happening in the classroom? It doesn't exist. She recently tweeted a link to an opinion column in the Washington Post titled, "Parents Claim They Have the Right to Shape Their Kids' School Curriculum. They Don't." Weingarten added the comment, "Great piece on parents' rights and public schools." So if Youngkin has to own Trump, McAuliffe has to own Weingarten. Now, McAuliffe says he's proud of the Virginia school system the way it is and implied that he sent his kids to Virginia public schools. Here's a clip with Meet the Press.
But Chuck, we have a great school system in Virginia. Dorothy and I have raised our 5 children. Of course, parents are involved in it.
Well, contrary to what McAuliffe strongly implied in that clip we just played, 4 of his 5 children attended private high schools, Gonzaga and Potomac School. McAuliffe obviously believes that his family deserves choice and control over his kids' education, and they do. But your kids, not so much. So education, Ryan, has become, it's really striking, this kind of dominant issue in this campaign cycle. And I think maybe McAuliffe, maybe Democrats underestimated how much pent-up frustration there is, not just about this curriculum stuff, but just about how abysmally schools managed the pandemic, or how contrary to the needs of families that schools, not just in Virginia, but everywhere, operated. And I don't see enough of a willingness to kind of grapple with that. Certainly there was not a willingness to grapple with that on the part of teachers union officials and some other. I know a lot of superintendents that have quit in the last year because it's just so frustrating.
And principals, yeah.
And principals, et cetera. Is this going to be a stumbling block for Democrats unless they figure out, they remember that there are parents who are Democrats and they're very frustrated with this.
Yeah, and I was warning a lot last year that schools were burning through an enormous amount of political capital in the way that they were approaching COVID. It's so difficult, particularly for any bureaucracy, but the school bureaucracies, more than any other, it seems like, have a difficult time enacting policies using common sense. And approaching a pandemic requires engaging with a lot of common sense. And so as a result, you had frustration all across the board, either complete shutdowns of schools or complete bans on kids being able to wear masks even if they wanted to, like just lunacy all across the board. And the result was an immense amount of frustration at schools. You layer on top of that this Fox News driven but also very real kind of critical race controversy. I'm curious about something that you mentioned in there about children having different attitudes about race and feeling inferior about themselves as a result of some of the teaching they're getting. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, and I've seen these worksheets. I've seen these in.
So this is from surveys from kids?
This is from testament from how they tell their teachers they feel after these kinds of really stupid. Again, they're not across the board. They're not at every school, but there are forces that want them in more schools where they have to complete these kinds of assignments that where they're ranking like their privilege. These kinds of exercises I think are obnoxious even at the college level or at the workplace level. I think they could be really harmful for like 6-year-olds to be perhaps for the first time forced to contemplate the rate, and it's a negative way. It's not just about making white kids feel guilty. Like I played that Condoleezza Rice clip because whatever you think of Condoleezza Rice, I think that was very well stated. That there's a lot of even in some activist kind of education circles, there's a lot of, our minority students, of course they're struggling. It's because they're minority students, and it's a different cultural thing. It's like a very low expectation that is racial and cultural that I think is absolutely wrong. And I hear activist educators like talk about that, and it is improper.
It has echoes of the famous doll test. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And for people that aren't familiar with this, the doll test was conducted in the 1940s. And it was central to sparking, not the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was already going, for a while. But the NAACP heavily relied on the doll test in making its argument in 1954 that before the Supreme Court that ultimately desegregated schools, which a real linchpin in the movement. And the doll test was they would show a black doll and a white doll to a white kid, to a black kid. And the kid would describe different characteristics of the dolls. And both white kids and black kids would describe the white doll as having superior characteristics and the black doll as having inferior characteristics. And when people saw that, they were like, oh, so this separate but equal thing that you're claiming is going to work is separate, but it's absolutely not equal because it's driving these types of attitudes around race and racial inferiority, which we need to root out. And that was many people would argue the kind of study that the Supreme Court kind of hinged its decision on. So if you're seeing something similar being produced by this type of privileged discussion in schools, then people are going to have to start asking themselves what they're trying to get out of it. Instead of disempowering education, maybe like empowering education might be a smarter way to go. Teach about Black liberation struggle. Teach about even some of the violent uprisings that were organized against white supremacy over the history of the country. Like teach those.
Teach it in history
and
class.
Teach it in a patriotic way.
Right.
To show that these were people who were fighting for the ideals of America. There was a gap between what America promised and what America was delivering. And these organizations or these individuals fought for it. Teach something empowering rather than disempowering if the product is kids telling you that they're inferior as a result.
Teach it in history class and not in this kind of like pseudo-scientific sort of diversity initiative sort of way where it operates at the dumbest level. It should be our actual history should be taught, even the unsavory aspects. We absolutely agree on that.
And not just black kids, like white kids should be proud of Robert Smalls. Right. Like stealing a Confederate slave ship. Stealing a Confederate ship and taking it over the Union and becoming a Union war hero. Like every kid should be taught about Robert Smalls and he should be a universal hero. Like that's the kind of, and then let Fox News complain about that.
Right, absolutely. Ryan, I'm looking forward to your radar coming up next.